composite international diagnostic interview, CIDI, which is used. Uh, Wing came up with a very good scale, which was the successor to PSI, known as the SCAN, that is Schedules for Clinical Assessment in Neuropsychiatry. This gave a comprehensive assessment of psychiatry and neuropsychiatric disorders. And there was the comprehensive psychopathological rating scale known as the CPRS, which had subscales of depression, anxiety, obsessional, schizophrenia pathology, which gave you a beautiful idea. And the eating disorder inventory was derived from the eating disorder component of this comprehensive psychopathological rating scale. Uh, they have certain scales that looks at needs. So there is a Camberwell assessment scale for needs. What are the needs of the patient? Camberwell assessment scale for need in elderly. Uh, we don't use the candid anymore, but there is some other scales which is important. That is, when a person uses mental health services, is he happy with the services? Somebody came out with a consumer satisfaction questionnaire to know how happy the person was. And there is also very interestingly a scale by Amador, which has not been used often, but to assess the unawareness of mental disorder, particularly patients who have no insight, to assess how bad is their lack of insight. So scale to assess unawareness of mental disorders has also been there. You have a specific scale for psychosis, that is the Burkwood scale for insight in psychosis. Berrios came without a simple scale for insight in general, and a patient satisfaction questionnaire for mental health services. These are very important in treatment intervention studies. When it came to suicidality, there were a lot of scales which were available. So we had the Beck's hopelessness scale, which was the first one. Beck came out with a scale for suicidal ideation, only to assess ideation. There was also a scale for suicidal intent. How much is the intention in one's life? There was a scale for assessing suicide risk that came up. Post attempt risk assessment, that is, what are the chances of risk after an attempt, risk of repetition. These are all scales which are available and can be used. And scale for assessing suicide risk of attempted suicide, so particularly patients with borderline with repeated attempts, what is the risk, and a parasuicide scale for non-suicidal self-injury, which also has been used. There are a lot of scales in the sexual domain also that have been used. So we have the sexual interaction inventory, which primarily looks at sexual interaction between the couple. How is their interaction? Is it proper, not proper? What is the kind of sort of general interaction that they have? There is a specific scale for measuring the intimate bond. How intimate are they? Only the intimacy component is measured. So we have the intimate bond measure. You have people who look at only arousal, so the sexual arousal inventory may be looked. Sometimes you look at different components of sexuality, so the multiphasic sex inventory may also be used. Sometimes people have repugnant attitudes towards sexuality that could hamper sexual function. So the multiphasic, the async inventory for attitudes towards sex. This is from the famous Hans Async, who gave us the Neo 5. Similarly, Async's inventory for attitude towards sexuality was there. Derogatis, who gave us the SCL 90, had a sexual functioning inventory also that looked at sexual function. There is also an inventory for sexual satisfaction. This is used in marital couples, and a sexual experience scale. There are specific scales for orgasm. There are specific scales for erectile stimulation. There are specific scales for aneurysm. So one can use these scales to rate the patients. When it comes to alcohol dependence, it's very important. We see so many patients with alcohol dependence, and we must use a very simple scale known as the audit. We've all studied it in our post-graduation, and the alcohol use identification test. It's been cited the most, used the most. We also have MIST, the MAST, which is the Michigan Alcohol Screening Test, which can be used, and the CAGE questionnaire. Everyone knows the CAGE questionnaire. It's there in Kaplan as well. So these are things that we should know and use with our patients. Severity of dependence scale, particularly for all drugs, that is heroin, amphetamine, cocaine, etc., has been there. There are multiple alcohol dependence scales. There is an Anton scale, ANTON, Anton scale for alcohol craving, which is used primarily. And you have an addiction severity index by McClellan. McClellan is a very famous personality in substance use. He was the editor of the Journal of Substance Abuse Treatment, Arthur McClellan. And he gave us the addiction severity index, which only looks at what is the severity of addiction as a whole, and hazardous drinking patterns, particularly patients who come to you with an emergency, alcohol, delirium, etc. You have the Paddington alcohol test.
단무지
Now, there are a lot of
하나님
short tests which are used. I'm
그리고
not going to go into
잘
those
보고 계시죠?
details, but
찡투님
you have an opiate
돌아오세요.
withdrawal scale. So you can use it to rate
찡투님
opiate withdrawal.
지금
Subjective and
찡투님
objective, both are there
귀신
and
같은
both should be
찡이님은
used.
계시지만
You also
찡투님이
have a
없어요.
benzodiazepine withdrawal symptom questionnaire,
찡투님
which you can use
들어오세요.
if you have patients with benzodiazepine withdrawal in your
큐
practice.
찡투.
And severity of opioid dependence as well as subjective dependence, which can be used to rate opioid dependence, which is very, very important. Uh, there are multiple scales used to rate anger and aggression also. So you have a bus, Durkee, hostility, and guilt inventory, which is important for anger. The most common used one is by Spielberger, that is the state trait anger expression.
New Eden.
Disease ran rampant, and most of the men died on the ships, and then their bodies were just thrown overboard, and the bones would just wash ashore at Gravesend Bay and also other parts of Long Island. And many of them are gathered at a memorial in Brooklyn. Just bones. We don't know many of the names of these individuals, but somewhere near the Stonehouse Park, which is still there, where they've recreated the actual stone house that Cornwallis's men were in from the original stones.